Welcome back to another episode of the Creative Mind Smart Money podcast. And last week we talked all about the difference between employees and contractors. So now we want to talk about how we pay our employees and what apps to use, pros and cons, everything like that. So this episode is obviously going to feel like a natural next step from the episode that you had before that. So we really want to make sure that we're kind of just diving into this whole employee aspect and making sure that we're getting really clear on it. Okay, obviously you've hired an employee or contractor, but now you're staring at payroll apps and you're like, which one do I use? Which one is the best one? And I really want to go over all of them today and talk about which ones are the best ones so you can fully understand that, but you can also understand like what's going to be best for you. So obviously you are always going to ask, do you need to run payroll through an app? Can you just Venmo them? How do you pay taxes? What's legal? What's smart? It's all just some big headache that's waiting to happen. And you really need to understand, like, how do you just pay your employee without feeling like you're doing something wrong? So I'm going to walk you through the most popular ways to pay your employee and then the pros and cons of different tools to make sure that you're doing it right from day one. So first of all, we want to talk about requirements. You're not just sending money anymore like a contractor, you're running payroll. So there's a couple of legalities around that. You first of all have to withhold taxes. You should have gotten them to fill out a W-2, which would have told you how much you need to withhold, like federal income, Social Security, Medicare, state, and local if applicable. For example, in Texas, we don't have state tax, so we just charge federal taxes. And then, of course, we do have FUTA, which is federal unemployment taxes, and SUTA, which is state unemployment taxes. So you do have to pay the employer side of taxes, which means that you do have to put in Social Security and Medicare into that employee. And of course, you do have to file payroll tax returns. Now, of course, that all sounds really, really scary. And you're probably looking at me being like, oh my gosh, Samantha, that already sounds like something that's going to cost me so much stress. But a lot of these payroll applications are going to take this off of your shoulders and really like bring it into a space where it's really easy for you to just go ahead and process it. Okay. So first of all, you're going to need a few things. You're going to need your employer identification number. If you didn't already get this when you signed up to be a business, to be in business, then you are going to need to apply for one. It usually doesn't take too long to get an EIN. Now, if you're like transitioning into a different classification, then yes, it can take a little bit longer to get an EIN, but you are going to want to get one regardless. Or if you already have one, great. You're going to have to register for state payroll. Again, there are certain payroll applications that will do this for you. It does come at a very pricey cost. So obviously, if you can do it yourself, it's better that you can do it yourself. You do need some workers' compensation insurance. You will have to get some to kind of like have them working. And then you will need a payroll system to track wages, tax filings, and year-end W-2s. If you want to. Of course, you don't have to. You can hire a person. There are people who physically do payroll. That does get a little bit crazy when you're dealing with reports. And if you have a bookkeeper who's handling your reports, it can get a little bit confusing. So I just want to make sure that you're kind of like keeping an eye on that. You cannot legally pay employees through Zelle, Venmo, or PayPal as regular payments because this does violate tax law and classification rules. The reason that these payroll companies or like payroll people are out there is specifically for this need, and you need to just keep an eye on that. Now that we've kind of gone over like how we need to process payroll, what we need, let's talk about some different payroll apps that we can use and ones that I highly recommend. So obviously, because I work with Gusto and because I am a Gusto partner as an accountant, I'm going to recommend Gusto. Now, that's not me being biased. I have had issues with Gusto in the past, and I do recommend that you are just a little bit careful about who you go with, of course. For me, the issue that I had with Gusto is they were trying to make my client pay with a wire, but my client wasn't able to wire money. Their bank didn't allow wires because they were using QuickBooks Bank. And then the QuickBooks Bank as well would have cost them like a huge amount for a wire, and they didn't want to do that. But that was the only way for them to process payroll. So it just became this big kind of like issue. So with Gusto, they do handle everything though. They handle your tax filings, direct deposit, W-2s, new hire reports. So it is really nice. They are kind of built with HR in mind. So it makes it really easy and streamlined. It's just, I guess you have to be careful about what you're dealing with in terms of, are you dealing with them as a payroll company? Are you dealing with it like as well as your bank? Like, is your bank really tiny? Like, what's going to happen there? because sometimes they do require you, like I said, to pay without wire for your first transaction. So they do have a really clean and intuitive interface. It's perfect for creative entrepreneurs. It's really easy to navigate, really easy to understand. It's one of the ones I always recommend because when you look at things like Paychex or ADP, their platforms are very dated. And that's not me trying to be like, ew, I hate things, but I'm a very technology forward person and I love user interfaces, and Gusto is a very pleasing user interface. So if you're looking for something that has something a little bit prettier, a little bit nicer, I would definitely suggest Gusto. Obviously, eventually, Gusto does offer benefits administration. They do have time tracking, and they also offer contractor payments. So you can kind of do everything all in one place. Now, one of the things that I love about Gusto that a couple of the other payroll companies don't do is that they actually take legal responsibility for tax filings. So if something is missing, it's on them, not you. One of the problems that I have with one of the payroll companies is QuickBooks. With QuickBooks, you kind of have to be on them to make sure that they're paying your payroll taxes, because if they aren't and you've missed it, it's on you. They take no responsibility. We'll get into that in a second when we talk about that, but definitely something I want to mention. Now, obviously, there are it is a slightly higher cost to use than some of the other options. $40 a month, I believe, with $6 per contractor, depending on the one you can use. That can also go up as well. So it does become a higher cost. It does not integrate natively with QuickBooks unless you're using Gusto's application. So it can integrate, but I always suggest you never do that because it can get really, really confusing and just really full of like issues there. And then, of course, it's best for small to mid-sized businesses who want to be compliant and want a really good and clean done for you payroll experience without the stress. Now, when I mentioned that I do assisted payroll, a lot of the times when I do assisted payroll, it's through a payroll application like Gusto. Again, like I mentioned, you can do it manually, but manual payroll can come with a lot of issues and a lot of like dangers in terms of your business. So the next one is obviously QuickBooks Payroll. So obviously, if you're using QuickBooks Online, it syncs with your chart of accounts. You have direct deposit tax calculations and automated payroll ones. But there's more cons to QuickBooks Payroll than there is pros, and I never recommend anybody uses it. Like, QuickBooks Payroll is the worst. First of all, they don't take legal responsibility for Mr. Late tax payments. You're still on the hook if something goes wrong, like I mentioned. But also, one of the things that really bothers me about them is they don't pay it immediately. So with Gusto, right, they'll collect that tax payment from you and it's out of your bank. Whereas with QuickBooks, it's kind of just like held, if that makes sense. Like they have like a holding account, but it's not really gone from your bank account. So if you have, let's say, $700 in payroll taxes, they're just going to put it in a holding account where they're going to pay it every quarter, but then that kind of leaves that money in your account, so you could end up going overdraft. And I've seen that happen with a couple of my clients where they completely forgot that QuickBooks was running payroll and they went into overdraft. Customer service for QuickBooks can also be a little bit hit or miss. Customer service for Gusto has always been phenomenal, which is why I always recommend them, even though I've had bad experiences with them in the past. And then, of course, the interface isn't as intuitive for first-time employers. It can get really confusing, which can obviously get a little bit messy. So if you're already comfortable with everything inside of QuickBooks and you really want everything in one place, then of course, QuickBooks is a good place, but you need to obviously be double checking for compliance and making sure that you have the money set aside for your payroll taxes because they aren't taking those. Of course, there are some other options like ADP and Paychex. Both of those are separate companies and are fairly larger payroll companies. They are great for larger, more complex teams. And of course, again, they do offer that HR services and benefits packages, kind of like a PEO thing, but they do require often sales calls, demos, contracts, and often feel a little bit really corporate for people who are just trying to either run payroll for themselves, a couple employees, or whatever that is. Gusto is like really fast and simple to get on and onboard in. Can be overkill and overpriced for solopreneurs or small creative teams. I think for someone I have that has like 4 employees, they pay like $300 a month for Paychex. And that's not something you need to be paying for when you have such a small team. So they are better for businesses with 10 plus employees or who have very specific compliance needs. Gusto can still work with that. I've seen Gusto with 50 employees, so it really depends on what you're looking for in the UI, but also some of the additional services that you're looking for, because obviously some of these additional services can be really easy. And then, of course, there's Square Payroll. So it is easy for businesses who are already using Square. It does mix employee and contractor pay easily. But I do want to say it's not nicely built. It's not built for salary team structures. Square Payroll is really confusing to navigate and really confusing to understand report-wise. It also has really limited features compared to Gusto or ADP. So obviously it's best for people who have smaller teams and are already running on Square, but I would not recommend it, period. It's an option if you really want to keep things like within your current ecosystem, if that makes sense. Now that we talked about all the different apps that we have for payroll, we want to talk about how pay actually gets processed. So for most of these, direct deposit is built into it. So you can actually direct deposit to someone's bank. It'll just get there on the date that you set and it's good to go. So if you want to pay someone every second Friday, they'll send you an email and say, hey, process payroll by Wednesday. That paycheck will show up in there. You can do physical checks and it's old school, but of course it's still allowed if you want to do a physical check. They'll just take out the payroll taxes from your bank account. I don't suggest physical checks to anyone. There's a couple reasons for this, and it has a lot to do with finances. So first of all, if you give a physical check to an employee, they have no obligation to cash that check. And you might be like, why would they not cash that check, Samantha? That's their funds. Like, what? They need money. Why would they not cash the check? You would think that. But I have several clients who have checks whose employees almost never cash their checks, even though they could be using the money or whatever. Maybe they're paid via tip through cash. So they never cash their checks. And then 6 months later, we get the money coming out. If you are a small business and you are giving out checks and they are not cashing their checks almost immediately, this is going to hurt your cash flow huge. So I always suggest direct deposit because it's easy for you and make sure the money's already gone. There's no kind of backlog of waiting for them to take stuff. And it makes sure that you're kind of staying within a budget as well. So obviously you can do pay cards for people who don't have a bank. There is a way to do that. I think there are certain companies that do that. I think Wex is one of them. I might be wrong. There's a payroll company that does that. And then, of course, you have your payroll frequency. You can pay them either weekly, bi-weekly, semi-monthly, monthly. You do want to think about the implications, the pros and the cash flow impacts of each one. Obviously, if you pay them weekly, you're going to have that in your bank every week. It can work for cash flow if you have a lot of money coming in. If you don't have a lot of money coming in, though, and you get paid monthly, then you would set it up bi-weekly. You can also do semi-monthly, which means either the 15th or the 30th of the month, which is how I run my payroll. This allows me to make sure that I have a straight 24 payrolls per year. And then you can also do monthly. Obviously, each one is going to impact your cash flow and your budget and things like that differently. Maybe monthly is a little bit harder for you because you can't hold on to money. Maybe you have some cash flow issues there. It really just depends on what you want, but it also depends on what it works for your employee. Just because monthly is easier for you as well doesn't mean it works for your employee. So you do want to make sure you choose a schedule that aligns with your team and your cash flow. So you're going to want to talk to whoever you're hiring as your first employee and kind of get that idea going. Okay, so now we want to talk about some payroll mistakes that we need to avoid. So obviously, filing late payroll, if you have payroll, is going to create legal penalties, and it's also going to create team trust issues. So if you can't afford to pay payroll on time, you're obviously going to have a team that's going to not want to work for you because they're not getting paid to do the job they're doing. You have missing tax payments or filings. So you are, even if the Gusto or someone else takes responsibility, you're going to want to make sure that your payroll taxes are being filed on time. So taking a look at those and making sure they're actually being filed or being remitted to the IRS and that you actually have a 940 or a 941. If you pay someone as a contractor just wants to skip the setup, that is a big red flag because you've already misclassified them, even though you are just doing them. If you hired them as a contractor to do a project, they did amazing, and you're like, you know what, I want you as an employee, that's a different story. If you're just doing it to skip the setup, though, that's not something you should do. And then, of course, not setting up unemployment or workers' compensation insurance is a big red flag, and not keeping payroll records for the required time, which is 3 to 4 years, depending on your state. So how do we choose the right payroll software for us? There's, again, 5 questions you need to ask yourself to choose the right payroll software. First of all, do I need contractor and employee payroll? Because that's where you're going to want to look for the right software there. How often am I paying my team? Am I paying them monthly, biweekly? Because certain payroll companies will charge per payroll, whereas some companies just charge per month. So there are a couple companies that will charge you per payroll processing. So you'll get charged every time you process a payroll. So if you had 3 in 1 month, you'd get charged for 3 payrolls. Whereas Gusto, for example, will just do unlimited payrolls in 1 month. Do you want full tax handling or just calculation? Are you already in QuickBooks and do you want a separate system, or do you want to just keep everything in the same ecosystem? And do you want to offer benefits eventually? If that's something you want to look at, that can be really easy to just jump into Gusto or something like that. So obviously payroll isn't just about getting people paid. You want to stay compliant and build trust with your team in a way that makes sense so that you can be seen as the CEO you are and not someone who really doesn't know what's kind of going on. So obviously audit your current systems with whatever you're using and start one if you're still DIYing it. If you're overwhelmed or unsure of which payroll tool will fit you, or if you want one, please DM me. I will leave a link to sign up for Gusto in my description box below if Gusto is something you want to go with. I will never ever say just go with what I'm saying. I would love for you to check it out and make sure it's a good fit for you first. Even though I'm a Gusto partner, like I don't just condone using what I tell you to use. But if you found this episode helpful, please leave a comment, a like, share it with a friend online, and of course, leave a review. And as always, I wish you the best week ever. We'll see you next week. Farewell, fellow travelers.